There are places on this earth that do not want to be found. Not in the way a shy animal doesn't want to be found, something that will flee if you get too close. I mean places that actively resist discovery. Places that have developed over a very long time a relationship with darkness and enclosure and the particular silence that exists where no light has ever reached, and have decided, in whatever way places decide things, that they would prefer to keep that relationship private. The cave systems of Southwest Virginia's Valley and Ridge Province are some of the most extensive in the eastern United States. Thousands of mapped passages, hundreds of surveyed systems, and beyond the surveyed stations, beyond the last mapped crawlway, more cave, always more cave. The karst geology of the region produces passage the way the mountains produce weather, constantly, indifferently, without any regard for whether anyone will ever see it. Most of it no one ever will. Ryan Marsh, Caleb Doss, and Priya Anand were geology students at UVA-Wise. They were 22 and 23 years old. They had caving experience, not expert level, but real experience. They had good gear. They had a cave they'd been given permission to enter, a survey map of the known sections, and the particular confidence of young people who have done a thing successfully several times and have begun to confuse familiarity with mastery. They pushed past the last survey station into a passage that shouldn't exist. The passage opened into a chamber. The chamber had been occupied. Recently. Actively. And whatever occupied it knew the moment they came through the passage that it had been found. Pull up a chair. The fire's going. The smell was the first wrong thing, and Ryan noticed it before the passage. He noticed it at the third survey station, a Y junction 40 minutes into the cave, where the left branch continued into mapped territory and the right branch ended, according to the survey, in a breakdown pile that had never been pushed. The smell came from the right branch. Not a strong smell, not an obvious smell, a cave smell mostly, the cold mineral damp that lived in all caves, but underneath that, something else, something organic, something that had no business being this far underground. He mentioned it to Caleb, who was leading. Caleb sniffed, said he didn't smell anything, kept moving left toward the mapped section. Priya, behind Ryan, said quietly, "I smell it." Ryan looked at her. She was looking at the right branch. "Survey says it's a dead end," Ryan said. "Survey's 37 years old," Priya said. "Breakdown piles shift." They followed Caleb into the mapped section. They worked the next passage for an hour, measuring, sketching, adding to the survey the way they'd come to do on previous trips, the satisfying work of adding notation to blank space. The cave here was beautiful in the way deep caves are beautiful, formations that had been building for 10,000 years in absolute darkness, existing for no purpose and no audience, stalactites and flowstone pools in the headlamp beams like something from a world that predated the concept of being seen. Ryan kept thinking about the smell. On the way back out, passing the Y junction, he stopped. "Give me 10 minutes," he said. Caleb looked at the right branch. "Survey says, survey's 37 years old. Give me 10 minutes. The breakdown pile was real, a slope of fallen limestone blocks filling the lower half of the passage, the kind of collapse that happened when the ceiling gave way over geological time. But breakdown piles were not walls. Breakdown piles had gaps. Ryan worked his way up the slope with his headlamp and found the gap at the top, near the ceiling, a body-width slot, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking for it, the kind of thing a 1987 survey team might have noted as impassable and moved on. He put his head through the gap. The smell hit him immediately, stronger here at the gap. The organic undercurrent he'd caught at the junction, amplified, warmer than the surrounding cave air, which was the wrong kind of wrong, because deep caves maintained a constant temperature, and that temperature was cold, always cold, the same cold in every passage. The air coming through the gap was warm. Something on the other side of that breakdown pile was generating heat. He pulled his head back and looked at Caleb and Priya.
"There's a passage, and it's warm." Caleb said, "Warm how?" "Warm like something's in there." A silence, the three of them in the breakdown slope with their headlamps making overlapping circles on the ceiling. "Animal?" Priya said. "Maybe. What kind of animal gets 40 minutes into a cave system?" No one answered that. Ryan went through the gap first.
The passage on the other side was taller than expected, 6 feet of clearance, easy walking, which was unusual for a virgin section in this kind of cave. Most unmapped passage in southwest Virginia was the other kind, hands and knees crawls through dissolution tubes barely wide enough for a human body. Tall walking passage meant a major drainage feature, a significant piece of cave, the kind of discovery that got written up. Ryan noted all of this in the part of his mind that was still doing geology. The other part of his mind was focused on the smell. It was stronger with every step. Not rotting, that was the thing he kept telling himself as they moved through the passage, the three of them single file, headlamps cutting the dark. Not rotting, not death. Something alive, something large and alive and close. The smell of a body generating heat in an enclosed space, the smell of breath and warmth and presence. The passage bent right and then opened. The chamber was large. Ryan's headlamp, even at full beam, didn't reach the far wall. He could tell by the way the light behaved, the way it diffused and lost definition before it hit anything solid, that the space was significant. 40 feet across, maybe more. The ceiling was 15 feet up, formations hanging from it in rows. He swept his headlamp around the chamber. The floor was flat, a dried mud floor, the kind that formed when ancient floodwater had deposited sediment and then receded. Flat mud floors were good geological indicators. They were also good at holding impressions. The floor of the chamber was covered in marks. Not geological marks, not the scalloping of water erosion or the dissolution patterns of acidic groundwater. Marks made by something moving across the floor, repeated passages across the same paths, worn into the dried mud. Not tracks exactly, not any track shape Ryan could identify, but evidence of movement, regular, repeated, purposeful movement across this chamber over a long period of time. "Ryan," Caleb said from behind him, "I see it. What made those?" "I don't know." Priya moved past both of them, her headlamp sweeping the floor. She crouched at the edge of one of the worn paths. She looked at it for a long moment without speaking. "These are recent," she said. "The mud is still, there's moisture in these edges. These were made recently." "How recently?" She looked up. "Days, maybe less." Ryan found the cache against the far wall. He found it because his headlamp caught the reflection, a brief flat gleam in the beam, the wrong kind of gleam for a cave formation, and he tracked it across the chamber to the wall and found it. Objects arranged against the wall in a section of the chamber where the ceiling dipped low, creating a kind of alcove. Arranged was the right word, not scattered, not deposited by water, not the random accumulation of debris. Arranged, placed deliberately, with intention. He stood in front of the alcove and looked at what was there. Bones, significant quantities of bone, small mammal, he thought, and larger, deer-sized maybe, all of it old and dry and sorted in a way that nature did not sort things. Sorted by type, long bones in one area, skulls in another, a stack of what appeared to be vertebrae, neat as a column. Beside the bones, objects that had no geological explanation, a belt buckle, corroded but identifiable, what appeared to be a boot, or the desiccated remains of one, the leather stiff and cracked, a metal canteen, old, military surplus style, the kind you saw in photographs from the mid-20th century, and above it all, on the wall of the alcove, pressed into the soft flowstone with enough force to leave deep impressions, handprints. Dozens of them covering the wall of the alcove from floor to ceiling, some large, larger than any human hand Ryan had seen, and some smaller, and some that were the right size for a human hand, but were shaped wrong in a way he couldn't immediately name. He stood close and put his own hand near one without touching it and looked at the proportions. Too many fingers, or fingers of wrong length.
The impressions were pressed too deep for a hand simply held against the surface. They'd been pushed in with force, with the weight of something behind them. "Ryan," Caleb said from behind him, "I see it. What made those?" "I don't know."
Caleb looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "We need to leave." "Yeah," Ryan said. "Now." "Yeah." Neither of them moved for another moment. The headlamps lit the wall of handprints and the assorted bones, and the old canteen and the belt buckle and the dried boot. Ryan thought about the smell, the warmth of the air coming through the gap. Something on the other side generating heat. He thought about the worn paths in the mud floor, days old, maybe less. He thought about the size of this chamber, the far wall he still hadn't seen, the upper reaches of the ceiling beyond where his headlamp reached, the dark that existed in this cave beyond the range of their lights, which was most of the cave, which was an almost incomprehensible volume of darkness in which something had been living and moving and arranging objects and pressing its hands into soft stone for how long? The canteen suggested decades. The bones suggested longer. The handprints on the wall, covering it floor to ceiling in the layered record of repeated visitation, suggested something that had been coming to this wall for a very long time. Caleb said, "Priya, let's go." Priya didn't answer. Ryan turned around. Priya was standing in the center of the chamber. She was facing away from them, facing the far wall, the wall Ryan's headlamp hadn't reached. Her headlamp was off. "Priya?" She didn't respond. "Priya, turn your light on." Nothing. Ryan crossed the chamber to her in 8 fast strides and put his hand on her shoulder, and she turned, slowly, not startled, turning the way you turn when you've been expecting someone to tap your shoulder, and looked at him. Her headlamp was off. Her eyes were open. In the beam of Ryan's headlamp, her eyes were... He would spend a long time trying to describe this afterward and would never find the right words. Her eyes were present, but aimed wrong. The way eyes look when they're receiving information from somewhere other than where they appear to be pointed. "Priya." "It's okay," she said. Calm. Completely calm. "It's been here a very long time, Ryan." He reached up and switched her headlamp on himself. The beam cut across the chamber to the far wall. The far wall was covered in handprints floor to ceiling, the same as the alcove, the same pressed deep impressions, the same wrong proportions. And at the center of the far wall, in a section where the prints were densest, where they overlapped each other in layers of accumulated visitation, there was a gap. A person-shaped gap in the handprints, a space where nothing had pressed, where something had stood repeatedly for long enough that everything around it was covered, and the space itself stayed clear. A standing place. A watching place. Facing the passage they'd come through. Ryan looked at the standing place and understood that whatever used this chamber had known about the passage for a long time, had stood at this wall and watched that passage, had been watching it the day the 1987 survey team had noted the breakdown pile as impassable and turned around. Had been watching it every day since. Had been watching it today, from somewhere in the dark above them, when they came through. "Move," he said to Priya. "Now. Move." She moved. That was the thing he'd be grateful for in the days afterward. She moved when he told her to. Whatever had hold of her attention in that chamber released it, or she released it herself, and she moved. They crossed the chamber fast. Ryan kept his headlamp on the passage opening, the way back, the breakdown gap, the mapped cave on the other side. He did not sweep the beam across the ceiling. He did not look at the upper dark. He made a decision to not look at the upper dark, and he kept it. Caleb went through the gap first, Priya second, Ryan last. Going through the gap last meant a moment, just a moment, a second or two, of being alone in the chamber while Priya's feet disappeared through the slot above him. A second or two of standing in the chamber with his back to the far wall and the standing place, and whatever watched from the upper dark. He felt it then, what Priya had felt in the center of the chamber. Not a sound, not a touch, an attention. The specific feeling of being looked at by something that was taking its time. Something that was in no hurry because hurry was not a concept that applied to it. Something that had been in this chamber since before the word chamber existed and would be here long after every human word for cave and dark and deep had been forgotten. It knew he was there. It had known since the moment the smell reached him at the Y junction. It had let them come in. Ryan went through the gap. They moved through the mapped cave fast, not running because you did not run in caves, because running in caves was how people died, but fast, the practiced fast of people who wanted very badly to be somewhere else and had enough training to channel that want into efficient movement rather than panic. Nobody talked. At the third survey station, Priya stopped. Ryan almost walked into her. He put a hand on the wall to catch himself and looked at her. She was looking back down the passage, back toward the Y junction, back toward the right branch and the breakdown gap and the chamber beyond it. "Keep moving," Ryan said. "It's following us," Priya said. "Priya?" "Not fast. It's not in a hurry." She paused. "It just wants to see how far we go." Ryan looked down the passage behind them. His headlamp lit 50 feet of cave before the bend took it. Empty passage, formations, silence. "How do you know that?" he said. She didn't answer. She turned and kept moving toward the entrance. They came out of the cave at 4:17 p.m. into cold gray November light, and Ryan had never been so grateful for sky. Even overcast sky, even cold sky, sky that went up and had no ceiling. They sat on the hillside above the cave entrance for a while without talking. Then Caleb said, "What was wrong with you in there?" Priya looked at her hands. "I don't know. You turned your light off." "I know. Why?" A long pause. "It asked me to," she said. The hillside was quiet. The November woods around them made their small sounds, a branch moving, a bird somewhere in the understory, the normal sounds of a living forest that suddenly seemed very loud after 40 minutes of cave silence. "What do you mean, it asked you?" Ryan said. "I don't mean it spoke. I mean..." She stopped, started again. "You know how sometimes you walk into a room and you just know something? You haven't been told, nobody said anything, you just know?" Yeah, it was like that, standing there. I just knew it wanted the light off, so I turned it off. She looked up at the cave entrance, the dark slot in the hillside, the beginning of the dark. And then it was just there, in the dark, right there. "What did it look like?" Caleb said. Priya shook her head. "You can't see it with a light. That's the thing. It doesn't exist where light is. It's the dark itself, almost. Or it's so used to the dark that it's become part of it." She paused. "But it sees fine. It saw all of us." Ryan looked at the cave entrance. He thought about the standing place on the far wall, the watching place, the passage it had been watching for 37 years. He thought about what Priya had said on the way out. "It just wants to see how far we go." He thought about the entrance of the cave above them, the slot in the hillside, the darkness behind it, and the passage that ran from that entrance back through the mapped cave and through the breakdown gap and into the chamber, and whether that constituted, in whatever way such a thing perceived the world, a door that was now open, a passage it now knew led out. "We need to report this. The formations, the artifacts, there are protocols for this kind of find. We need to tell someone." "Tell them what?" Ryan said. Caleb didn't answer. Ryan looked at the cave entrance for a long time. Then he said, "We need to seal the gap." "We can't seal a breakdown gap without..." "We need to seal the gap," Ryan said again. "Today, before dark."
He looked at the cave entrance. He thought about what Priya had said. It just wants to see how far we go. He thought about the light going out of the cave entrance as evening came on, the dark traveling the passage inward from the entrance, filling the mapped sections, reaching the Y-junction, moving down the right branch, reaching the breakdown pile, finding the gap they'd left open. Before dark, he said. We seal it before dark. They went back in. They moved the breakdown blocks by hand in the narrow passage above the gap, working fast, working without speaking, until the slot was filled and packed and no air moved through it in either direction. The warm air from the chamber had stopped anyway. Sometime while they were working their way through the mapped cave on the way out, it had stopped. Ryan didn't mention this to the others. He thought about what it meant for the air to stop being warm. He decided not to think about what it meant for the air to stop being warm. They came out of the cave for the second time at 6:44 p.m., full dark. The woods around the entrance were black and still. They hiked to the truck without using their headlamps. None of them wanted to see what the beams might show at the edge of the light coming out of the cave behind them.
They filed no report. Caleb wanted to, spent 3 days arguing for it. But what would the report say? That they'd found an unmapped chamber in a cave system in southwest Virginia? That the chamber contained artifacts and modified bone and handprints that didn't match any known anatomical profile? That one member of the team had experienced, what? A communication? An invitation? Ryan looked up the cave survey records. The 1987 team had 4 members. The lead surveyor had filed a standard report noting the breakdown pile as impassable. He'd filed it on October 31st, 1987, the same day one of his team members had been reported missing. The missing person was never found. The case is still open. Ryan called Priya once about a month after, just to check in. She sounded fine, normal, herself. He almost asked her. He had the question ready. The same question he'd been carrying since the hillside, since she'd said, "It saw all of us." He wanted to ask if it was still watching, if it had found the gap they'd sealed, if sealed meant anything to something that had been living in that dark since before the cave had a name. He didn't ask. He said goodbye. He hung up. He didn't go back to that cave. But sometimes, in the particular dark that exists just before sleep, he thinks about that chamber, the standing place on the far wall, the watching place, and he wonders if it thinks about him, and he thinks it probably does. If this one reached you in the dark, if you're going to think twice before you push past the last survey station into unmapped cave, subscribe to Whispers by the Woodline and hit the bell so you don't miss a single story. More are coming. Each one set in a real place in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. Each one built on something that was there long before we were and will be there long after. Drop a comment below. I want to know, would you have sealed the gap or would you have gone back in? Because Ryan went back in and the warm air had stopped. The fire's still going. Come back soon.